Hello and welcome to the second presentation of the Spring 2020 season of the Medical History Interest Group. My name is Melissa Nathia and I'm the History Collections Librarian here. The Medical History Interest Group presentations are sponsored by the Loftus Library History Collections and the Department of Bioethics and Interdisciplinary Studies. If you haven't already done so, please sign the attendance sheet before you leave. Refreshments are available on the other side of the wall, so please help yourself. And we don't have anybody standing, but there are still a few seats up front if you'd like to get closer and be able to see and hear better. The final presentation in this series is on Monday, April 13th, The Scientific Revolution in Management Efficiency and Its Effects on American Medical Practice from the early 20th century on. It's with Dr. William C. Wood, Colonel, U.S. Air Force retired, and also retired from the cardiovascular sciences. We have several history exhibits on display today. Here on the fourth floor, we have a pop-up exhibit related to today's lecture. The display features materials from Loftus Library's history collections. We also have scientists and their microscopes, which shows various microscopes in our collection with images of well-known scientists who use the same versions in their research. In the gallery space, we have Andrew A. Best, M.D., celebrating the life and legacy of a local civil rights leader and medical trailblazer. The display features artifacts and archival material from our Andrew Best collection and a newly created traveling banner exhibit. We also have two exhibits on the second floor: medical record keeping in eastern North Carolina, 1890s through the 1940s, and to commemorate 300 years since the pirate Blackbeard's adventures around North Carolina, we have the Plague of Piracy. The exhibit includes photos and artifact cast replicas on loan from the North Carolina Office of State Archaeology and the Queen Anne's Revenge Lab. It is complemented with artifacts from the Country Doctor Museum. Today's presentation is Emma Dupree, Pitt County Herbalist, and our presenter is Alex Albright, MFA, English retired. Also, this presentation will be filmed and it will be up on our website probably within about 2 weeks. Alex Albright retired in 2018 after 37 years of teaching in the ECU English department. He and his wife Elizabeth are proprietors of the Fountain General Store in Fountain, North Carolina, where they've lived for nearly 20 years. Alex's 2013 book, The Forgotten First, B1 and the Integration of the Modern Navy, was a finalist for the Montaigne Prize. Among his most recent articles is Langston Hughes in Reno, published in Nevada History in 2019. So here is Alex Albright with Emma Dupree, Pitt County Herbalist.
Thank you. So thank you all for coming out. I'm going to talk for maybe a half an hour or so and try to get some people in here to talk. There are a few folks I think that knew Aunt Emma, as she was fondly known by most everybody who was treated by her in the Fountain and Falkland communities, as well as those who just knew her. But I got interested in Aunt Emma when we moved to Fountain, and I'm not a medical historian. I'm here a little bit cowed by the talent and the interest of folks that have been doing this for a long time. So forgive me if I sort of stray a little bit from what y'all think is the accurate way to talk about the history of this field, and I would appreciate people correcting me. I've been fortunate to know people like Holly Matthews, who's book with Jim Kirkland and Karen Baldwin has been very helpful in understanding some of the context that we're talking about here. So I'm saying that to let you know that I came to this from a personal interest, not from an academic research field where I'm trying to figure out this very interesting area of our medical history. So when we're thinking about people who do the things that Aunt Emma did as an herbalist and traditional healer, the term that often is used is a root worker, and that sort of implies either helping people get well or helping people get worse if we're trying to get after them. But it's kind of a misnomer too. For example, Aunt Emma, as Holly demonstrated in her book, she used the roots, the flowers, the stems, the berries, the stalks, and the leaves in her work, and she used it only for healing. As far as we know, she was dedicated to that art, and I do think of it as an art. As Holly also, where is Holly? Yeah, she's here. Yeah, okay, thanks. So thanks again to Holly Matthews for her work. And she points out in her book that folks like Aunt Emma they're unusual but not unheard of, and they often come to this interest or this talent with a deeply spiritual kind of impetus. So they feel as if they have been blessed, and this is a feeling that comes to them usually from a very early age, and they do this kind of work, healing people with natural properties as a way of working out their faith. So that's a real critical part for most folks like this. Now, how many of y'all are medical students? So there are a few of you. A person like Dr. Quigless also worked with roots and herbs. He was an African-American physician in Tarboro, but he's unusual in that he was medically trained at Meharry. He graduated in 1937, and this is just a little side. A lot of what we're talking about is black history here, and part of what we're often talking about when we're talking about black history is the ways that African Americans have been denied equal opportunities, despite this phrase, separate but equal, that kind of haunts the 20th century in American cultural and historical life. But now Dr. Quigless, back to him, and this is just an aside to talk about the difficulty. There was no school in North Carolina for him to get a medical degree at the time. He worked for years as a porter. He grew up in Port Gibson, Mississippi, worked for years as a porter in Chicago to save the money to get to medical school. Got to Meharry, and this is the one anecdote I'll tell you that I think sort of typifies in some ways these disadvantages that I'm trying to talk about. He tells this story about how at Meharry they always let in many more students than they could keep, and they called them in this fashion. They would send 3 young men to the Vanderbilt vat. See, Meharry in Nashville is across the road from Vanderbilt, and so when they needed, they couldn't afford cadavers. Okay, so when they needed to look at body parts, they sent the young men to the big vat, which is where the worked-on body parts had been discarded. So there are no whole cadavers, but they would have a list of what they needed to put together a complete person, and they were given tongs and told to go and fish these body parts out of the vats. And the 2 young men that went with Dr. Quigless that day left before they hardly got started. And that's the way that he told me that's the way we called the students. If you could get through that experience, you could possibly make it through medical school. So that's, y'all got copies of Quigg's book also. He's a fascinating person. He came to Eastern North Carolina because he had been to Rocky Mount playing with the Rabbit's Foot Minstrels in 1922. And he just fell in love with Eastern North Carolina. And he swore, in 1922, he swore one day I'm going to come back to Eastern North Carolina and be a doctor. And in 1937, he finished Meharry and came back to Eastern North Carolina. So anyway, I want to let Miss Emma introduce herself with a little bit of a video here, if I can run this machine, and I think I can. This is about 2 minutes, and this is out of about a 40-minute video that the ECU medical students made in 1979, and I think Stephanie, you're going to be the only person here who was on the scene when that video was shot. This is Aunt Emma's niece, so she's the only person in here, I think, that could actually come. I'm sorry, great-grandma, excuse me. Okay, but she was on site in Fountain the days that the ECU students came around to film Aunt Emma and to get this story documented. And you'll get a sense of her liveliness and her pronunciation, which makes it a little difficult sometimes to understand exactly what she's saying until you watch it a second or third time. But this is about a 2-minute video near the beginning of this piece that you can find on the webpage here and also on YouTube.
I was raised around the town about 2 miles of Faulkner on the farm, Dupree farm. And it was my life then helping people, fixing my yams, taking it to them, food, and so on, like that, on up, every year, and finally my mother stopped farming. We moved right in the little town of Faulkner. And I served 15 years with Eden Kane, his wife named Daisy, and so on. I served there and was married there twice. And my last husband, I went to work where he was working at with Dr. Janice Moore for 15. I still was making my years and helping him out with his medicine, all in any kind of sickness. I always did. And all I made and fixed and rubbing and pneumonia and dropsy and 19 and 18, the influenza, when it begun, I toted my tea and so on. The Lord just let it work. And it's been working. I've been doing it all my life and on up until now. They have found where some of my years have healed many dangerous things, diseases, complaints, and arthritis, and sugar, and bright kidney disease, and roach of a liver, and so on. And that's the story that they's telling. I get calls, and they comes and get my years, the biggest one it raised here on my yard. And they tell the story that it's happening them. And I get mighty good use. I've got mighty good use from some of the different doctors that don't know anything about my life. But this life of mine, I was told years was a little bitty girl. 6 years old, my daddy took me to the 7th Spring. And I got 14, I went myself. So it's just my life.
Yeah, it took me probably 2 or 3 times watching this to catch, I think it was the second time where I realized she was saying herbs, what I would say herb when she's calling them yerbs. And so there's this language issue there that takes a while to get used to. But fortunately, you can look at it over and over again. And it's just I find it a really charming video. She wanders around her yard in Fountain. It's at 3313 North Jefferson Street. This house is still standing. The yardscape is very different now. But that's the house that she worked in from 1936. I think the first from 1897 to about 36, she lived in the Falkland community, actually at the Dupree Crossroads outside of Falkland before she moved, excuse me, and into the town of Falkland. And then in 36 to the town of Fountain, where she grew herbs in her yard, a different kind of herbs than what she was used to getting from the Tar River. But she mentions a lot of things here that her herbs and her potions would help cure. And Quigless was also very well known in the Rocky Mount area in eastern North Carolina for his herbal remedies for arthritis. And I don't have any idea if the two of them ever met. And I think that's an interesting kind of notion how much interplay there was between people in the different communities that were, how much of it was coming through family and learning themselves, and how much of it was coming through interactions with others. And I think there's a tendency maybe to think that because Emma Dupree is no longer with us, that we're dealing with a strictly historical subject. But I'd like for us also to think about the numbers of people that are living today who knew her and were treated by her and can tell stories about this. And I'll come back to that in just a moment. But now another characteristic that Aunt Emma shared shares with other folk medicine herbalists is this understanding that she has a special gift, and that this gift is recognized early on in her life by others. And this is where she talks about she's taken to the 7 springs for the healing water, and then she goes back to it. And I want to read just a little bit here. This is one of the early documents on Emma's life. It was a book that Karen Baldwin put out. And this is Emma's words talking about when she was young. And again, this is part of that pattern that we seem to see with people who have this talent or this blessed gift, that they recognize it early on, and they're unusual people. She says, when she was young, they said I was just looking all around. I was just looking every which way, and I kept acting and moving and doing things a baby didn't normally do. And I walked early. I was walking at 7 months old, just good and strong. When I got outdoors, I went right to work. I was pulling up weeds, biting them, smelling in them, spitting them out. And folks in them days, they just watched me. They watched what I was doing. Then when she got older, she said she was still different. This is an anecdote that doesn't translate too well for us today because we get our eggs from the store most often. I could get the guinea eggs with my hand and they wouldn't stop laying. Other folks had to get a spoon or something else. If they put their hand in a guinea nest, they wouldn't lay no more. And they'd send for me to get their guinea eggs. And people also recognized that she had a way with plants. Anything they couldn't raise, a flower or anything, they'd send for me to come set it out. And then she took a lot of these cuttings and then used them, planted them in her yard. Her knowledge of plants and herbal cures came from the oral traditions. She says as a youngster she was known as, quote, that woods gal. And she says, I didn't play. I'd get my sack and my daddy's hatchet, and it was just as sharp as it could be, and I'd go out in the woods. And since those woods gals days, Miss Emma has used her gifts to help people. That were my job, and I enjoyed it. I just rode from one person's farm and house to another, white and black, and they was sweet and good and as nice as they could be to me. And that's that Falkland community where she was going down to the riverbanks to collect those herbs. One of the reasons, of course, that we're here, I think, is because we are talking in February. This is Black History Month. And I think it's interesting. This is another thing I think I learned from Holly's book and her research, is that sort of the origin of this it's primarily an African-American cultural thing that this healing arts come out of black communities. And research tends to support that a big part of this is because African Americans were being denied traditional health care. Okay, so they weren't getting, and we have people in our midst, Dr. Devathan and Dr. Irons, who helped integrate this hospital in modern times, but that was way past the point where, when Quigless was opening his practice, if you were black and needing to go to the hospital, I think it was Gastonia, he told me, was the closest one that you could get admitted to. So we have this long history that extends from the Civil War through the end of the 19th century into all this 20th century, where things are happening and there are reactions being made to this system of oppression that we're not really paying much attention to when we're not in that culture. So I'm especially grateful that the folks that in 1979 recognized the special character of this woman and documented her so that we can see her with us today. I'm going to try to move this on for another image. And so these are mostly pictures that were done pretty soon before she passed, of her going around her herbs. But it's appropriate that we talk about Emma Dupree today, not just for Black history, but also, she was, in 1984, she won the Brown-Hudson Award from the North Carolina Folklore Society. In 92, the North Carolina Heritage Award. And we also remember her today in Fountain with Emma Dupree Day. Reverend Rose will be hosting that on April 4th. And that starts, I think, at 9:30. Okay, we'll have a day of events, and we think the St. John choir will be there. And the idea with the Emma, this is, I think, the fourth of these. And so next year we hope to have the Emma Dupree Day. It's always the first Saturday in April, and we do that as a precursor to Earth Day. Because it's our belief that that Aunt Emma was like, she was the ultimate. She was the first of the Earth ladies. I mean, she was really doing this way before anybody was thinking about Earth Day and how integrated everything, health and body and mind and plant world would be. So then the plan it would be next year we would go to St. John Missionary Baptist in Falkland to celebrate Emma Dupree Day. And Aunt Emma is buried behind that church, and we would lay a wreath on her grave, and that puts us in perfect timing for the 25th anniversary of her death to install the state historic marker commemorating where she lived in Fountain, and that would be 2 years hence. So remember that April 4th, and we hope we'll get as much publicity as you've managed to get for this event, Melissa. Okay. One of the things that, as I mentioned, I'm hoping will happen is that people start talking to folks that knew her. Our postmistress, Paulette, she tells stories. You say Aunt Emma, and again, you say Emma Dupree, and Paulette says Aunt Emma and tells stories about the potions, but she doesn't remember quite what was in it. This event has gotten a lot of publicity, and there's a little Facebook page in Fountain, and one of the exchanges, I'll share you a little bit about this. And again, this is what I'm hoping, one of the things I hope would come out of an event like this is that people with still open research agendas would say, wow, there's a lot of oral history that we could get talking to people who knew Aunt Emma and maybe some other folks like this, and we could work with Annie Anderson back here, who's with the Country Doctor Museum, which is another part of the university's mission to document the history of medicine and healing in eastern North Carolina and the South. So, but this little exchange is just on Facebook. It's going to disappear if we don't do something to capture these sorts of memories. And there's one person who writes, do you remember the brew she made and brought to us when we were sick or had a baby? And she brought me a jug of it after I had Jake, and Daddy always had some in the refrigerator. And someone writes back, yes, and I love those berries on that fruit tree too, and the cream milk. And someone else chimes in, she talked the fire out of my foot when I stepped on hot charcoals. She did a lot for us. And someone else says, oh yeah, I love that berry tree. Never did know what it was, but she used it in her remedies. And that's the extent of that little exchange. But the point here again being that there are lots of folks out there that remember this woman, were affected by her, were cured by her, and the stories are terrific. And again, that house is 3313 North Jefferson. Let me show you a couple more pictures here. Yeah, this is from her wedding, we think. Yeah, I found transcripts. What do you know about this? Oh, who?
That's one of her nephews who has passed.
Okay.
When she got.
We want to get comments on the film, so here.
I'm her great-granddaughter, Stephanie, and it just, everything you say is true. I couldn't appreciate it when I was young, but it's just, this was one of her nephews. She outlived all of her children except for one, and she only wanted to help people. She never charged, and my biggest regret is not paying more attention. It's amazing to me. It's such a blessing to me. She always said, your name will go further than you ever will. She had no idea. I had no idea. Thank you guys for doing this. And my baby needs to see this. Is so important. Thank you. Any way I can help. This was when she won the award. We all went to Raleigh.
Uh-huh.
And I remember she bought her a new suit. She dipping snuff at the table. She said she didn't want to put her false teeth in because they made her sick. She had false teeth. She just wouldn't wear them. And she was just happy. She met senators, and you would have thought she just is. I remember I was in high school, and I was overwhelmed, but now it's all making sense. It means so much to me to see this. And so many days being sick, people came every day. She didn't turn anybody down. She didn't need the money. She did it because that's what she loved to do. She was one of 18. She was the daughter of a slave. And if she was here today, I remember one thing, you said you were going to have comments. Excuse me, guys. But I want to impress upon y'all, my great-grandmother couldn't write. But every time for every election, down ballot commissioners, she would walk up to the library in Fountain to cast her vote. It's important to stand for something. And I'm so grateful that she instilled all of this in me. Thank you guys for doing this. I appreciate you.
Thank you.
This
Thank you, Stephanie. That's terrific, yeah.
and thank you for doing this
Yeah.
because who would have told the story? I have to thank you. You're like family. And and you know, it's pain for us because our immediate family is so small. And it's hard. We have 3 family members and they loved her, but she held our family together through everything, the Depression. She was born in 1897. And she used to talk about how poor her children were, and they used to have to switch shoes. The girls would wear the boys' shoes and so on and so forth. But they were productive human beings. They served in the military. They worked. They retired. It's amazing.
Yeah, it really is.
And we appreciate you.
Yeah. I met her very briefly in 1984, and I was not paying attention.
She would have adored you. She probably talked. I know she talked to you.
The Vine sisters were at that event.
The Vine
somebody was
sisters,
cooking Brunswick stew, and there was Miss Emma, Aunt Emma.
Well, it's funny because we only heard about this because our cousin, her niece, happened to see it, and she was like, "Oh my God, there's my aunt," and so it started.
So what can you add?
I can just remember Aunt Emma. I was a little girl, and my mom, my Aunt Emma's brother, my Papa Noah, and Aunt Emma were brother and sister, and so Papa Noah's daughter is my grandmother. So my mom, who was her niece, would take me. We went to the house maybe 2 or 3 times that I can remember as a little girl, and I just remember she was making soap in a big kettle, and she gave my mom some soap, and we went there a few times, and I just remember that about her. I remember she was very flexible, and she would move around, and she would show you that. That was the last memory I have of her. We went to her house, and I know she had to have been, I guess, in her 80s, something like that, and she could just move around. She was trying to show that she was still vibrant and, still in good health. So I came to the library to study, and I walked off the elevator, and I see this display. I was like, oh, my God. So I posted it on Facebook so family would know, and Stephanie saw it.
And what is your name again?
Gita Harris.
Gita Harris.
Mm-hmm. And that's our cousin Cato. He loved her. He loved his family. He's passed now as well, but he lived in Maryland, and when he would come home every summer, he would make sure he would go see Aunt Emma, because his mother passed. He grew up with Papa Noah and the rest of the sisters and brothers.
Okay, that's neat.
Yes.
So we're on a roll. Who else in here? We got some more folks that knew Aunt Emma. All right.
Aunt Emma was my aunt also. She was married to Uncle Mance, who was my great-grandmother's brother. And so we would also go to her house. And my grandmother was Mary, who was Uncle Mance's niece, and called her Mary Bland. And so we would go up there, like it was on Sundays. We always went there on Sunday afternoons. And then some nights, though, because it depended on who was sick. And so sometimes it was nice. And I had asthma and eczema real bad. And so I didn't know what was going on, but we would go there, and Emma would go to that cabinet and get that salve out. And she would say, Maybelline, put this here on this baby and just rub her down at night now. Tomorrow morning now you got to give her a bath, because that stuff is potent. And so, but my skin was better, and I feel like that as of today, because I don't have any problems with my skin. It was real bad. It was only my hair and everything, and but with her salves and stuff that she made, it provided healing. And so, but she was one sweet, 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 sweet woman. Never met a stranger. You could always come to her house anytime. She never turned you away. Just like someone else said, she'd never turn you away. So she was always good to us, and we loved it. She had a small yard out front, because most of it was yerbs, as she said. But you had a little place to play, but not much. And so that's some of my memories.
That's terrific, yeah. Anybody else? Thank you. This is up. Right.
So I have a question
Yeah.
related. My recollection is that Emma moved to Fountain in the 60s. I don't remember her personally, but her last husband was Austin Dupree. Is that correct? And Austin.
We call him
Mance. Okay. And well, We knew Austin because he kept the mules on the farm that we technically grew up on. It was my grandmother's farm, and so the mules were kept behind our house. And I remember him, we would catch a ride on his wagons and things like that. But I don't remember actually meeting Ms. Emma because she was used kind of as a boogeyman because we would be threatened. I had warts as a child, and my mother would say, well, let's go see Rubel's aunt or sister, and she would have remedies, but we talked to other folks. But the question I have that I'm a little puzzled at right now is you mentioned your Uncle Noe or Uncle Noah. Was that her brother or her father? Her brother. So.
And he got sick, and he came back to stay with her in the later years of his life. That's just who she was.
Okay, but he got to like 110 or something like
No,
that.
he wasn't that old. But her mother lived to be about 107. But Uncle Noah was in his 90s. They all lived
My grandmother.
along.
We're talking about Nora Williams, is
Noah
this?
Williams. His daughter is my grandmother. She lived to 99.
Which one was, which?
Viola.
Viola, okay, yeah, we knew Viola.
Yeah.
We knew Viola.
Viola and Rubel.
And so we
So you
knew
knew about Rubel.
Rubel and we made.
Rubel's was our cook.
And so that's why we were being threatened. We're going to take you to see Rubel's aunt. And then Ruby Johnson was another one we knew as well. Okay.
And Minnie was their sister who passed. That was his mother. Oh,
Okay. All right. Well, when Miss Ruby died, she must have written it up, but there was a huge obituary where she had all her family members named, including Miss Emma and all her nieces and great uncles and everybody that she could have. So that, now I can't find it. It's in the reflector. So sometime in September of 2008, I need to find it.
That's the travesty because everything that Rubber had was recorded in her Bible because there was no other way for our people to really, we didn't have access to papers and stuff, and she didn't know how to write. She was never afforded that opportunity, and she never forgot it. That's why she stayed on us to make sure that we did everything. That's why I see we have to do our best. This is like a reminder for me. She went through so much to make sure that her family had. They were just poor. But she still was fortunate enough to not let that hinder. And we had the herbs and stuff. That was something that she loved to do, but it was out of necessity first. Let's remember that, because we couldn't go see the doctor, so we would have died. Yeah. Oh yeah.
They were tenants on my grandmother's farm.
Yeah.
That's right behind St. John.
St. John, yeah. She used to talk about roving around there, and she. Just that, it was, to me as a child growing up, it was just normal. I'm going to the woods, come with me, walk with me, and it was enjoyable, but I didn't really grasp it. I don't think I'm able to do that now, 47.
But she had things in her yard. The three plants I remember best were something called Carolina phlox, a tall pink phlox is a native phlox. And then there's something called bouncing bed that was in that yard. And then evening primrose, which is kind of like a weed. And it was all over that yard. And
She had a lot of tansy and rabbit tobacco was what she was trying to get. And sassafras, which I was surprised to find out is so expensive, when she would just go out and get the roots and go out in the yard and get, well, sassafras is hard to find, but they say it's practically impossible. But I was never really sick. Well, I mean, if you're going to pay for it, but you know, if you're going to go out to the woods and find it, but riding in the car, oh, stop, there's some rabbit tobacco. Like, what in the world? But yeah, having headache, tansy. I think, is tansy the plant with the wide leaves? Does tansy have wide leaves?
A fern, more fern.
Okay, well, you could lay it across your head. That was for headaches. And I used to think when I saw that Head-On commercial a few years ago, something you could roll on your head if you had a headache. And I was like, my grandma knew what was going on. But seriously, those people, this medicine we have today is coming from the ground, right? So you just never know. But thank you for that memory. We appreciate it.
I went with Gladys Wheaton to her house one time.
Oh, Miss Gladys.
And I remember she met us at the fence or a little edge of the yard, and Gladys was looking some canna lily, I think,
Yeah.
she had, and she wanted her dug and gave it to her. But I do have a memory of course, we knew Austin. he would let me walk the mules. He wouldn't stop that wagon. I think the mules wouldn't let him stop the wagon because they were going home. But when we got to the barn, he would let me, he'd take one mule and I would lead the other mule down to where the opening to the pasture were. And I really thought I was tough stuff with that mule, you know, but he was a nice man.
He was a good man to my
But
grandmother. Yeah.
our grandmother was Lily and Chris Lawrence. And a couple of years before she died, she had to have emergency surgery. And our family, her family especially, has a problem with morphine, derivative drugs. So the first day after the operation, they're pretty good, but then about the third day, they start to go back in time and hallucinate and talk and do all kinds of stuff. And she was sleeping, but her eyes were open, and she started talking. And she said, no, I have a little bit, but not that much. She said, go down to Emma Dupree's house. And she explained where they lived, and I was listening to her. So later on, when I knew she was awake, I said, Grandmother, who were you talking to? And she said, a man came to the house, and he was making sausage, and he wanted to get some sage.
Oh, yeah.
And I told him Emma had lots of sage. Go and get that sage for her. So, and then when I came to work at the med school, and Jay Postman showed me the film, and I said, that name sounds real familiar. And then I put two and two together. That's what Grandma was talking about.
Your Uncle Man, you remember it was 66, 67 when
No, well, he was okay. So I'm old, but I'm not that old. I was born in '73. But I, if I'm not mistaken, I do think it might have been in the. I'm not sure.
No, it's
Because
somewhere
my
in the
mother was
60s.
raised. My mother was born. My mother's passed, but my mother was born while they were in that house, and she would have been 60-some years old. So maybe I don't. They were they. How long have they been in Fountain? Like when they first went to Fountain? Because my mama Sandra was born, and Aunt Faye was born in Fountain, and Aunt Faye is 72. So we can do the math. So
One time period that they moved back.
yeah.
She in interviews says 36 or 39, but there could have been some fluidity there.
Right, so that makes about
yeah,
the amount of
that
time
she's,
we're
yeah.
talking
Now, do you know what happened to the Bible?
Well, when she passed, my aunt, her daughter, my great aunt, Doris, she had a lot of that. And then when she died suddenly, things just got moved around. You know, it's like the matriarch is gone. I don't
Sure,
think it's
yeah.
destroyed. In fact, my aunt may
Yeah,
have some stuff.
yeah.
But I'm
Well-
going to make sure I look into that because she had a huge Bible, beautiful printed pictures.
Right,
It's so
yeah.
old by the time, you turn the page and it would crumple, but there was still enough of our genealogy. She used to call us guineas. And I just thought, why in the world is, because that's where we're from in Africa. Some of our family, Sheila, cousin Laura, they had the DNA test done. We are from New Guinea. And I used to be like, New Guinea, like you call us a chicken, because that's a bird. But from New Guinea, West Africa. That's where we're from. So much knowledge that just is coming back to me in pieces. I need to memorialize it. It's just really.
You got a young man that's going to...
Well, he doesn't remember, but
Okay.
yeah, I'm sure he.
I would just like to say thank you for doing this presentation. I feel like since I'm younger than everyone in here, I don't know that much stuff yet, but I'm excited because I feel like North Carolina doesn't get much credit for Black History Month stuff and just anything in general. So I'm glad that you were able to do this presentation and show me what it feels like just to, have somebody important that's in my family, that's local, and that's in our state. So, thank you.
Mike, how much of this conversation was getting on the tape? Great. I still want to bring it around, the mic around to people, but when you're going that kind of conversation, it's harder to do because we do want as much as possible to have both the questions, the answers, the comments, and this is obviously a very interactive presentation.
One of the I think it was Carter Smith's wife who did this interview with Aunt Emma in 1979, and she had, one of the interesting parts of it is that she does describe the family Bible, and that's where she, so we're talking oral history here, and I've seen her Aunt Emma's birth date listed at various years, but that's where July 4th, yeah, that's what the Bible said, yeah, and it was.
She was the daughter of a slave.
Yes, and the seventh child also, yes, yes, yeah,
18. So,
18.
and I often think about, like, I wonder if she was a Pisces like me, really. Because her attitude was so strong and she was so giving, but well, she got the belt to me once or twice. I deserved it. She was amazing. One story, I don't know if people know, but about empowering women, because I see a lot of women here. My great-grandmother divorced her first husband. That was not heard of. He had an affair on her, and while she was having their first child that died, she almost died, he was with someone else. She got out of her sick bed and went to go find him to let him know that it was over. A lot of people don't know that, but I was raised knowing that story. She was lucky to meet her husband, Mance, who she loved with her whole heart. But she wouldn't take any mess from anybody. That was not popular. She was poor. He was a good-looking man, half Indian, whatever it is they call good-looking back then. I guess he had long, beautiful hair, but he was unkind to her, and she didn't stand for it, which was huge in like 1917 or 18. Yeah. So I always think about that when the choices as I've gotten older. I wish I thought about it when I was younger, but the old people knew what was going on. Yeah. And so it wasn't a popular decision, and she stepped out on faith, and I'm sure people, talked and gossiped, but she did what she had to do. She was amazing.
Yeah. Your comment about how agile she was, if you watch that video, even if you can't understand everything, you'll see her walking around and yanking up plants and and showing them what she does.
She uses a hoe and gets horseradish.
Yeah, and she's just taught, so it's worth it really just to watch her.
The rows were longer than this room, and she worked it till she was 8. She failed when she was like 90, 91, and then she kind of went down from there. But she used to be out there in the cool of the day and in the heat of the day, watering her flower. That was her joy. So, yeah.
Who else has a question or a comment? This is terrific. Thank you so much. I've got just a couple of things I'd wrap up with. And again, back to this idea of Earth Day and people who were not scientifically trained but sort of figured these things out on their own, whether it's a gift of God or a natural intelligence or somehow a connection with the world, with everything around them. And when you hear her talking, she's like so far ahead of her time in so many different ways. She's very concerned about the vessels that we cook our foods in and what's getting transferred from the apparatuses, the utensils themselves. And we hear that in, with plastics today. And some of what she talks about reminds me of another very eccentric fountain person, Freeman Bynes. There's a very interesting video of him up on YouTube. And if you watch Mr. Bynes talking, he's obsessed with the poisons that are going on the crops that are poisoning the wells. He's obsessed with the pipes that are bringing us water, and especially poor people, and the wells that have been contaminated by all the different things. And he's expressing this from his own personal knowledge, not something that he's picked up somewhere. And those are two, that's an interesting video if you want to watch another fountain person. And Mr. Bynes is right now getting discovered by a Music Maker Foundation. He's going to have an exhibit of his guitars at the Greenville Museum of Art this summer. There'll be a big event there. There's just been a show in London with his guitars. They're out in Fountain right now filming interviews with him, and this is a national film crew, and a book of his drawings and writings will be out later this summer. And he lives on that road between Fountain and Falcon. There's a yellow mailbox on the left and you can't really see the house, but he's in the middle of a field that's sprayed every year, and he's very, very concerned about these things. So I find that kind of interesting. I appreciate very much y'all's attention, and especially the participation of the folks that knew her. Yes?
I just have one question. Obviously,
Is there a collection of her recipes? Did anybody else in the family learn?
That's a good question. I don't think that the recipes were, to my knowledge, have not been.
Her daughter did.
Her daughter did? Okay, okay. And I think I think as Holly and others have pointed out, there's a considerable danger in taking the ideas of some of these cures and just sort of experimenting with them. Certain things. But that's a good question. Again, we might find people that with their particular treatments would be aware of what was there. But a lot of what we hear a lot of times is, well, I don't remember. I remember the color or the taste or some sort of basic ingredient. But she used honey in a lot of, and there are certain techniques that we know that she used, but we don't really have the percentages.
She demonstrates some in
Yeah,
that,
she does.
in that documentary.
She does. Yeah, she does. Yeah. So thank you again for coming out, and thank you, Melissa, for hosting this. Yeah, thank you.
We've had kind of the question and answer session already, but we will I'll bring this microphone around to other people who want to speak. Also, after 37 years at Lopus Library and over 10 years of running this presentation series, I will be retiring on March 31st.
Wow. I forgot my pictures. That's her house. And there aren't many of these. I'll just run through these real quickly.
She's sassy right there.
That swing has swung almost every one of our children at one time or another. Wow.
And this is the picture that also shows up on Wikipedia.
Yeah, she wasn't trying to look good. She was trying to go out and find some stuff. I know and that's our house. And you see, like, that's the pine tree. She would have got some of the sap for something. I think that's a she called them
maypops.
Maypops.
Yeah.
I think that's that vine. We had mint, anything we wanted, anything that so much natural food she canned. She was an awesome cook. I remember when those people came, we were all so amazed that she was just so in phase, even as a little kid, because it was the 70s. I was just like, who are all these, excuse me, white people? Because I didn't know what was going on. And she said, oh, girl, hush, they just trying to learn about my healing stuff. And she was excited to see them. She didn't want to hold it. She wanted to let people know she wasn't selfish, like, I don't want to tell you what's going on. But I think it's, they say people cook with love. She truly did what she did with love. So I guess maybe a person that doesn't have it in them would have gotten a different result. I don't know. It was really special to see her work. I fell and split my hand in the wheelbarrow. She told me to get out, but I didn't want to. About 4 years old, fell and split to the bone. I remember screaming and seeing the blood. Oh, hush. Went inside, got some soot out the chimney, put it on, didn't have to go anywhere. Bad burn. She did know how to talk the fire out, and I probably wouldn't admit it unless somebody else had already did, but it was true. So, I mean, she wasn't I don't know if she was a mystic or not, but she had refined her craft.
She seems like a mystic. She was certainly
she did. And she believed in dreams. She was what we call a primitive Baptist, which is something that I've always been interested in. I don't know if you guys ever heard of primitive Baptist before. Definitely a different way of preaching if you're not used to it. But yeah, they sing and they believe in dreams and visions and things like that. So. And the soap she used to make. I had a cousin say the other day on Facebook, she was like, that soap would get anything clean. And I was like, I always wanted apple soap. I didn't know how good it was to have. Lots of soap that you made. You could wash your whole body or clothes with it. It was great.
You're terrific. Somebody's got to get you.
I didn't know that I remembered it. And I really over the years have tried to suppress it because she was everything, but it's something about seeing her honored for what she's done. She deserved it more than anything. I just wish I had another day and knew what I knew now. Just one more day.
Thank you.
Just one more.
This is a terrific book. It's one that Holly and my friend Jim Kirkland and Chip Sullivan, who's moved away, and Karen Baldwin, who's passed away, put together. I think this was 1992, and
Passed away.
yeah, it's
We
been
didn't know.
6 or 7 years, yeah. But Kirkland wrote the chapter on talking fire out. I believe that's right. It's very interesting, and so it's a terrific book. And I think it's. I'm not sure if it's out of print. I know you can still find it online. So I would highly recommend that if you're interested in this subject. And this book is virtually impossible to find. It's the book that Karen put out. Or published in 1984, and it's all Pitt County people. So they have a copy here at the library. Yeah, so it's if you have one of those, hold on to it. Yeah, it's a terrific book. I think that was, yeah. This close with this. The whole time I'm making it and bottling it up or talking about it or anything, I'm giving it to the Lord. He's the doctor. He's just got me making it for folks. I got no power in it, but I ask Him to give them faith, and it'd have cured cancer. And that's I think is a good, for her faith. Yeah. Thank you.